I never thought I'd spend my Friday night at the office, but 23 years as a divorce attorney had taught me that betrayal doesn't keep business hours. The Manhattan skyline glittered outside my 45th floor window as I reviewed the Henderson case files. At 61, I should have been home with a glass of wine, maybe calling my daughter in Boston. Instead, I was here when the receptionist buzzed through at 11 p.m. 2 people wanted an emergency consultation. No appointment. Cash payment. They needed to file for divorce immediately. I almost said no, but something in Rebecca's voice made me pause. They seem desperate, Mrs. Thompson. The woman is crying. Please? 23 years. I'd built my reputation on being available when others needed me most. Send them to conference room B. I'll be there in 5 minutes. I gathered my legal pad and clicked down the dimmed hallway in my heels, my reading glasses still perched on my nose. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Most of the firm had gone home hours ago. David Park's office was dark. My law partner usually stayed late on Fridays, but he'd mentioned something about his daughter's ballet recital. I pushed open the conference room door, and my world stopped. There, sitting across the mahogany table, was my husband of 35 years, Richard Thompson. 63 years old, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing the Armani suit I'd bought him for his birthday. Next to him sat a young woman I recognized instantly, Melissa Chen, 29 years old, his executive assistant for the past 4 years. They hadn't looked up yet. The lighting was dim, and I'd recently cut my long gray hair into a short bob, changed my glasses. Lost 20 pounds after joining that yoga class David had recommended. Richard was scrolling through his phone. Melissa was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. Her very noticeably pregnant stomach. I stood frozen in the doorway, my legal pad pressed against my chest like a shield. My heart hammered so hard I thought they might hear it. But Richard just glanced up briefly, squinting at me in the low light, then looked back at his phone. He didn't recognize me. My own husband didn't recognize me. "Thank you for seeing us so late," Melissa said, her voice trembling. "We need help. This situation is complicated." I found my voice somewhere deep in my professional training. "Please, have a seat. I'm Mrs. Thompson. Let me get my recorder and some paperwork." I turned and walked out, my legs somehow carrying me down the hall to my office. I closed the door and leaned against it, pressing my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming, or crying, or laughing at the absolute insanity of this moment. Richard. My Richard. The man I'd put through business school while working 2 jobs and finishing my law degree at night. The man who'd held my hand through 4 miscarriages before we adopted our beautiful daughter, Claire. The man who'd promised me on our 30th anniversary, just 5 years ago, that I was still the only woman he'd ever love. He was here, with his pregnant mistress, asking me to help them file for divorce. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and texted David, "Emergency. Need you at office now. Conference room B. Don't let them see you." Then I opened my laptop and pulled up our firm's database. I had access to every case file, every document, every piece of financial information we'd gathered over the years, including Richard's. You see, 6 months ago, Richard had come to me with a request. He wanted to update his will, move some assets around. He said it was for tax purposes, that his financial advisor recommended it. I'd thought it strange at the time, but I trusted him. I'd even helped him, using my legal expertise to draft the documents. Now, with my hands flying across the keyboard, I pulled up every file, every bank statement, every investment account, every asset transfer, and there it was, a pattern I'd been too blind to see. $2 million moved in increments over 18 months into an LLC I didn't recognize, property deeds transferred, investment accounts liquidated and shifted, my inheritance from my father, the brownstone in Brooklyn my parents had left me, the stock portfolio I'd built over 40 years of careful saving. Richard had systematically moved it all into accounts I couldn't access. The door opened. David Park stepped in, his usually calm face etched with concern. "Margaret, what's wrong? Are you okay?" I looked up at him. David, 58, widowed 3 years ago, my law partner for 15 years. The man who'd quietly supported me through every difficult case, who remembered my coffee order, who'd started leaving fresh flowers on my desk every Monday after his wife died. "David," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "My husband is in conference room B with his pregnant girlfriend. They want to file for divorce, and I've just discovered he's stolen everything I own." David's face went white, then red. Then he crossed the room and gently took my hands. "Tell me what you need." What I needed was to scream, to cry, to drive home and smash every trophy Richard had ever won at his precious golf club. But I was Margaret Ellen Thompson, senior partner at Thompson & Park Legal Associates, and I had built my entire career on keeping my composure when everything was falling apart. "I need you to witness what's about to happen," I said, "and I need you to record it, every word. Consider it done." I refreshed my makeup, straightened my jacket, and walked back to conference room B, with David following at a discreet distance. He slipped into the observation room next door, where a two-way mirror and recording equipment allowed us to monitor sensitive negotiations. I sat down across from Richard and Melissa, setting my legal pad on the table. "Now then," I said, my voice professionally warm, "tell me about your situation." Richard leaned back in his chair, that familiar gesture of confidence I'd once found attractive. "It's straightforward, really. I'm married, but the relationship has been dead for years. My wife and I haven't been intimate in over a decade. She's cold, focused only on her career, never home. We've grown apart." Each word was a knife. We'd made love 3 weeks ago. On our anniversary, he'd brought me roses. I kept my expression neutral, making notes. "I see. And Miss Chen, how do you fit into this picture?" Melissa looked at Richard before answering. "We fell in love. I know it's complicated, but what Richard and I have is real. His wife doesn't understand him. She never wanted children, and I'm giving him what she couldn't." The room tilted slightly. I gripped my pen harder. "You're pregnant?" 5 months. Her hand moved to her belly again. "Richard has been so supportive. He's going to leave everything to start fresh with me and the baby." "Everything?" I kept my tone mild, curious. Richard nodded. "I've already made arrangements. Moved assets into a new business venture. My wife won't fight the divorce. She's too proud. And honestly, she'll be fine. She makes good money with her little law practice." My little law practice. The firm I'd built from nothing. The firm that had subsidized his failed restaurant, his disastrous tech startup, his year-long sabbatical to find himself in Thailand. "I see," I said. "And what kind of settlement are you planning to offer your wife?" "Standard division. She can keep her retirement account, the apartment in the city. I'll take the house in the Hamptons, the boat, the investment properties. The properties I'd bought, with my money. The house in the Hamptons I'd purchased as a surprise for his 60th birthday." "That seems fair," Melissa chimed in. She had her career. Now it's our turn to build a life. I made a show of reviewing my notes. "Mr. Thompson, I need to ask you something. Does your wife know about your relationship with Miss Chen?" "God, no. Margaret is clueless, always has been. Buried in her work, her cases, her causes. She probably wouldn't notice if I disappeared tomorrow." The Margaret who'd canceled court appearances to sit with him through his father's funeral. The Margaret who'd learned to cook Thai food because he'd developed a taste for it on his sabbatical. The Margaret who'd believed every late night at the office, every business trip, every golf weekend. "And you're certain you want to proceed with this divorce?" "Absolutely," Richard said. "I should have done it years ago. I've wasted enough of my life." That's when I stood up, slowly, deliberately. I walked to the window, my back to them, and took off my reading glasses. Let my posture shift from professional to personal. When I turned around, I was no longer Mrs. Thompson, attorney at law. I was Margaret, his wife. "Hello, Richard." I watched the color drain from his face as recognition finally hit. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. Melissa looked confused, glancing between us. Margaret? What are you? I don't understand." "Let me help you understand," I said, my voice cold and clear. "I'm a senior partner at this firm. I've been a divorce attorney for 23 years. I specialize in high-asset divorces, specifically cases involving financial fraud and infidelity." I walked back to the table and opened my laptop, turning it so they could see the screen. Bank statements, Asset transfers, the LLC that didn't exist 6 months ago, all of it. You see, when a spouse comes to me with suspicions about their partner's fidelity, I advise them to document everything: financial records, phone logs, travel receipts. I tell them that in New York State, adultery is grounds for fault-based divorce, which can significantly impact asset division. Richard had gone from pale to gray. You can't. This is a conflict of interest. You can't represent yourself. You're absolutely right, I said. That's why I won't be representing myself in our divorce. But I will be filing for dissolution of marriage on Monday morning. And I will be hiring the best divorce attorney in Manhattan. She happens to be my former protégée. She's vicious. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared, sliding it across the table. These are copies of documents showing that you fraudulently transferred marital assets without my knowledge or consent. You'll notice the dates coincide with Miss Chen's employment start date. 4 years of systematic theft. Melissa spoke up, her voice shaking. Richard said you agreed to the transfers, that you didn't want to be bothered with financial details. Did he? I looked at my husband. Richard, did you also tell her about the prenuptial agreement we signed 35 years ago? The one that states any assets acquired during the marriage through my family inheritance remain separate property? Or about the clause that mandates a full forensic accounting in the event of divorce? He hadn't. I could see it in Melissa's face. Let me paint you a picture of what's going to happen, I continued. On Monday, I'll file for divorce, citing adultery and financial fraud. I'll request a temporary restraining order, freezing all marital assets. I'll subpoena your phone records, your credit card statements, your travel history. I'll depose everyone at your office. I'll find every restaurant receipt, every hotel charge, every gift you bought her with our money. I turned to Melissa. And you, Miss Chen. Did Richard tell you he'd leave his wife for you? That you'd live happily ever after? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. He's lying. Richard doesn't leave. He hedges his bets, keeps his options open. I know this because I've been watching him do it for 35 years. I pulled out another document. This is a credit card statement from last month. That charge at Tiffany's? He bought me diamond earrings for our anniversary. That charge at the plaza? We had dinner there to celebrate. He told me I was beautiful, that I was the only woman he'd ever love. The room was silent, except for Melissa's quiet sobbing. Here's what's really going to happen, I said, sitting down across from Richard again. This time, I was in control. You have 2 choices. Choice 1, we proceed with a contested divorce. I unleash everything I have, every legal strategy I've learned in 23 years of doing this. I drag this out for years. I make it so expensive and so public that your precious reputation is destroyed. Your golf buddies will know. Your business associates will know. Everyone will know that Richard Thompson is a cheating thief who stole from his wife. I let that sink in. Choice 2. You sign the settlement agreement I'm going to present to you tomorrow. You return every penny you fraudulently transferred. You give me the house in the Hamptons, the boat, and 60% of all remaining marital assets. You walk away with your $401K and the apartment in the city, and we never speak of this again. Richard found his voice. That's not fair. I built that business. With my father's money. Money you're currently hiding in an LLC registered in Delaware under a false business name. Would you like me to explain to a judge how you did that? The fight went out of him. I'd seen it happen in dozens of depositions. The moment a spouse realizes they're caught, that their affair partner wasn't worth it, that they've gambled and lost everything. And what about her? Richard gestured weakly at Melissa. That's between you and her, but I'd suggest being honest for once in your life. I looked at Melissa. He's not leaving his wife for you. He was never going to leave. He was going to take my money, move it offshore, and then in a few years, he'd claim the business failed. He'd file for bankruptcy, and you'd end up with nothing while he moved on to the next young woman who believed his lies. Melissa stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Is that true, Richard? Were you lying to me? Richard couldn't meet her eyes. She grabbed her purse and walked out, slamming the door behind her. Richard and I sat in silence. 35 years of marriage, reduced to this moment in a conference room at 11:30 on a Friday night. I loved you, he finally said. Once, in the beginning. I loved you too, I replied. I put you through business school. I supported your dreams, even when they failed. I forgave your mistakes. I stood by you when your father died, when your business partners betrayed you, when you couldn't find your purpose. I gave you everything I had. And you repaid me by stealing from me and sleeping with a woman young enough to be your daughter. I felt invisible, he said quietly. You were always so successful, so confident. I needed someone who made me feel important. Then you should have talked to me, gone to counseling, been honest. Instead, you committed fraud. I stood up, gathering my papers. David will email you the settlement terms tomorrow. You have 48 hours to accept them. If you don't, I proceed with option 1. And Richard? I always win. I walked to the door, then turned back. One more thing. The baby Melissa is carrying? You might want to request a paternity test. I pulled her employment records. She's been dating someone in accounting for the past year. Those weekend business trips you took together? He was covering her shifts. Richard's face crumbled. How did you? I'm very good at my job. That's why you should never have underestimated me. I left him there and walked back to my office. David was waiting. 2 glasses of bourbon already poured. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed, he said, handing me a glass. Remind me never to get on your bad side. I laughed, surprising myself. Then I started crying. Deep, wrenching sobs that I'd held back for hours. David pulled me into a hug, letting me ruin his expensive shirt with my tears. How did I not know? I asked when I could speak again. How did I miss all the signs? Because you trusted him, David said gently. Because you loved him. Because you're a good person who assumed the best in people. That's not a flaw, Margaret. That's who you are. I wasted 35 years. You built an incredible career. You raised an amazing daughter. You helped hundreds of people through the worst moments of their lives. That's not wasted time. I pulled back, wiping my eyes. He took everything, David. The house, the money, my trust. He took it all. No, David said firmly. He took money. Money you'll get back. But he didn't take your strength, your intelligence, your compassion. He didn't take the person you are. And Margaret, you're extraordinary. I looked at him then, really looked at him. The flowers on my desk every Monday, the coffee that appeared during late nights, the way he'd always had my back in difficult negotiations, the quiet support he'd offered for years. David, I know the timing is terrible, he said quickly. And I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know that someone sees you, really sees you. Not as a wife or a professional or an obligation, just as Margaret. And that person is pretty amazing. The settlement came through on Monday. Richard signed everything without contest. Melissa Chen quit her job and moved back to California, where I later heard she married her boyfriend from accounting. The baby was his. Richard lost his country club membership when the board learned about the affair and the fraud. His business partners quietly pushed him out. The last I heard, he was working as a consultant in New Jersey, living in a studio apartment, dating a woman his own age who didn't tolerate nonsense. I got my money back, all of it, plus interest. I kept the house in the Hamptons, though I rarely went there. Too many memories. Instead, I bought a beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, with a garden where I could plant roses. Claire came home from Boston for Thanksgiving. She brought her fiancé, a kind young man who taught high school English. Over turkey, she asked how I was really doing. I'm good, I told her. And I meant it. Because I'd discovered something in the wreckage of my marriage. I'd discovered that I didn't need Richard to be whole. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. For 35 years, I'd made myself smaller to make him feel bigger. I'd apologized for my success, downplayed my achievements, made myself secondary in my own life. Never again. David and I started dating 6 months after my divorce was finalized. Nothing dramatic, just dinner and conversation and the realization that we'd been moving toward each other for years. We took it slow, no rush, no pressure. Just 2 people who'd been through enough to know what mattered. On our first official date, he took me to a small Italian restaurant in the village. Over wine and pasta, he asked me what I wanted from life now. I thought about it. Really thought about it. I want to wake up every morning and not feel like I owe anyone an apology for existing, I said. I want to use my intelligence without feeling guilty. I want to succeed without making myself small. I want to be seen as I am, not as someone wishes I would be. David reached across the table and took my hand. That sounds perfect. And it was. I'm 63 now. My practice is thriving. Claire had a baby last year, a beautiful little girl she named Ellen after me. I'm teaching a course at Columbia Law School on high-asset divorces. I've started writing a book about financial fraud in marriage. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that Friday evening, the moment I walked into conference room B and saw Richard sitting there with Melissa. How my world had shattered and reformed in the space of a heartbeat. People ask me if I'm angry, if I hate Richard for what he did. The truth is, I'm grateful. That night, standing in that conference room, I finally saw myself clearly. Not as Richard's wife, not as someone's mother or daughter or partner, just as Margaret Ellen Thompson, attorney, fighter, survivor. And that woman, she was someone worth knowing. The best part? I didn't wait for karma to handle Richard. I became karma. And sometimes, that's the sweetest revenge of all.